So there was a lot of stimuli that was negative stimuli that drove me into like a fractioning of personalities in order for me to survive. And I didn't really understand why I was doing some of the weird things that I was doing growing up as a kid and as I got into my early adulthood stages. And I went from victim to survival mode to being aware of why I was doing some of those things. Because when you have issues with authority figures and you can't hold down a job, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in a criminal mindset and lost and depressed and all those things, and you just don't know why you can't be happy and you can't be normal. And all those things kind of like the floodgates open up, and then you're like, oh yeah, okay, now I remember why. Now how do I survive this?
Welcome to another episode of the Onward Podcast. This is Emily Harmon, your host. I always wonder where people are when they're listening to the Onward Podcast. Are you going for a walk? Are you walking your dog right now? Are you at the gym? Maybe, maybe not due to COVID. Are you cleaning your house? Are you driving somewhere? Drop me a line sometime. Let me know what's your best time or favorite time to listen to the Onward Podcast. Also, just send me a message on Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn, or send me an email. It's all that information is in the show notes. I'm just wondering, how do you like the Onward Podcast? It'd be great if you could leave a review on the Onward Podcast. Haven't had a review in a while, so that would be awesome. It's kind of tough sometimes to just be sitting at home alone with my dog Pearl on my lap, recording a podcast episode when I can't see the audience, can't get much feedback. So I'd really love to know what you think about the Onward Podcast and if it's helping you. That's my goal. I'm hoping that these episodes, these interviews that I do with so many different guests are helping you figure out that you're not alone and that you can overcome adversity. My guest today, Claudiu Szenasi, is the husband of a former guest, a recent guest that I had on the show, Mary Szenasi. And I want to let you know that this episode could be a trigger for somebody. I want to let you know that we talk about sexual abuse in this episode. So if that's a trigger for you, you may not want to listen to the episode. Or if there are children around, I would not recommend listening to it out loud with children around. And we don't go into a ton of detail, but still. I'll put a link to Claudiu's wife's episode in the show notes so you can listen to that as well if you would like. In this interview, Claudiu talks about his journey in overcoming physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. He is no longer in survival mode. Instead, he's thriving. And he says he has a true underdog story. Claudiu, welcome to the Onward Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm excited for you to be here. I interviewed your wife a few months ago, I think it was. And you guys are an interesting couple. You both have been through quite a bit of stuff. And you say that you're thriving now. You're no longer in survival mode.
Right.
Tell us your story.
Well, I think a lot of people don't really understand. So if you're a child and you grow up, and especially between the ages of 0 to 7, where you have your most critical developmental stages, and you happen to suffer, traumatic experiences, whether that would be severe neglect or being physically abused or being sexually abused or whatever that may be, those things have a tendency to get people to fragment. And so most kids, even if they're dealing with some type of really difficult traumas, they usually don't face those traumas until much later in life when they're a little bit more established and they start calming down, and the mind starts to allow you to be able to say, okay, maybe it's time that we start looking at some of these issues. So when you
probably at age like between 0 and 7 too, you don't even have words to put to what happened, depending on what happened to you. You don't know how to process.
No, you really don't. You really don't. You just start in survival mode. And so that's what I would consider like the victimhood, the victim part of it, where things are so severe that you're not really understanding what's going on, and the personality fragments. And you have those parts of you that are in just deep survival mode. And a lot of those parts get buried for a very long time until you're actually mentally ready to start facing some of those things. And for me, that didn't take place until I was approximately about 25, 26 years old.
How old are you now?
I'm 41 now.
Okay.
I'm 41 now. So my childhood sexual abuser was my uncle, was my blood uncle. And it's a betrayal thing as well, right? It's not just a physical betrayal, but it's a betrayal thing because he was supposed to be someone that was taking care of me, and instead he was taking from me. So parts of my personalities fragmented for my own survival. And, I was a little bit of the weird kid and the quiet kid. And there was a lot of other factors that were involved with regards to my PTSD, such as environmental change, extreme environmental change. I moved to America with my parents at the age of 7.5. And that was I grew up with my grandparents, with one of my uncles who was my abuser, and another uncle who was like a father. And my
Where did you move
parents,
from? Where were you living?
I was born and raised in Romania.
Okay.
So at the time, it was like I was born in 78. I lived there until 1985, at which stage we came to the United States with my parents. But I had grown up with my grandparents. And then so my uncle, one of my uncles, which was my abuser, had access to me. And then the other uncle was like a father figure. So it was kind of my parents were off living in a city and working. The communist government that was in place, because they put in their visa to come into the United States, they controlled all the job market, food, everything else. And they essentially made it very difficult for my parents to stay in one spot. So their schedule, they were making them work like nights and changing jobs, changing companies every 2 weeks or so, just to make it difficult because they put in their visa to come to the United States and pursue a better life.
Wow.
And so that put me in my grandparents' care. And my grandparents had my uncles living there, who then one of them was my abuser. Another one was like my protector and a teacher, like a father figure. And so that's kind of how it was. And then at the age of 7.5 years old, my parents came around once in a while. But at that stage, it was like, okay, let's go. We're going off to America. And that was it. And so there was a lot of, stimuli that was negative stimuli that drove me into like a fractioning of personalities in order for me to survive. And I didn't really understand why I was doing some of the weird things that I was doing growing up as a kid and as I got into my early adulthood stages. And I went from victim to survival mode to being aware of why I was doing some of those things. Because when you have issues with authority figures and you can't hold down a job, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in a criminal mindset and lost and depressed and all those things, and you just don't know why you can't be happy and you can't be normal. And all those things kind of like the floodgates open up, and then you're like, oh yeah, okay, now I remember why. Now how do I survive this?
Did you ever talk to anybody about what was happening, or were you in a position of being too afraid?
Well, I did when I was young. Before we had left, I actually spoke out and told his wife. And then his wife at the time went home at our house. I was still playing in the street with my friends, and I told her exactly what happened. And she went home and confronted my uncle and told my grandmother what had happened. And I heard them arguing from the street, but basically he just wrote it off as, what? He's crazy. Something like that never happened, But I was sexually abused. And when I fought back, I was beaten and threatened that if I ever said anything, he would kill my parents and he would kill my grandparents. And so those types of things are very commonplace when you have an abuser or a pedophile that is acting towards a child. It's about large part of it is about control, getting away with it, and instilling that fear that keeps kids quiet and because even as a child, I was protective, right? And so I had this person that was abusing me, and my main focus was protecting my parents from this man killing them and protecting my grandparents from this man killing them, because that's how he had threatened me.
What about the other uncle who was a father figure?
Okay, so my family was, I guess the best way that I could put it is we're very, very poor, almost gypsy-esque, a lot of alcohol abuse, thievery, okay, because when you live under a communist regime and you don't have a job and you're not working or whatever, you still got to put food on the table. So I had experiences where the Romanian secret police busted in our house and was beating my uncle with a baton because he had stolen a bag of corn for us to eat. They never even found the corn, but that was the first time I ever pulled a knife on someone. And I was 5.5 years old, and I cussed him out. He was like, look at this little nothing talking the way that he does. And he looked at my grandmother and was like, this is what you're teaching him, But at that stage, like I said, it was survival mode, and there was a part of me that had grown up that was protective in essence of other people around me. And so when those situations took place, I was able to kind of like step in and draw some attention and do what I could as a child. So yeah, it's kind of one of those things where you just get into that survival mode, and you're not sure exactly why you're different, but you are. and you don't understand it. And then growing up, as you start to get flash memories back into your mind when you're ready to be able to cope with that stuff. And then I went into, at the age of 25, I did some pretty intensive therapy to attempt to kind of overcome some of these things and deal with not understanding why I wasn't normal and why I couldn't be happy. And so I did extensive therapy for quite some time, for a number of years, like 7 years or so, 8 years. And then I kind of like, I was going in, finding my way. They were giving me tidbits, and then I would go work on my own, and I would go back. And it was kind of like that. The process was so very, very slow. And I kind of found that my experience with therapy was that they weren't really giving me the tools that I needed to understand how my psyche worked and
When
how
you were going through the therapy, were you talking about the abuse?
Oh, of course.
Those 7 years.
That whole time I was talking about the abuse. I was talking about how it was affecting my marriage at the time, because I'd been married before. This is my second marriage, and how it was affecting us sexually, how it was affecting us in terms of a relationship day to day, how certain things that I did triggered her and how certain things she did triggered me. And so it was pretty intensive. But what I didn't like is that they would only give me information which I would ask about. And if you don't know any better, you're not going to ask the right questions, right? You're not going to have the right questions to ask.
Right.
So I wasn't aware of those types of things. And I was aware of these different parts of me that would come out and take over, but I didn't understand how any of that worked. And I didn't get that information until about like 5.5 years in. And then when he told me, I was like, well, shit, what were you guys waiting on? Like, I don't understand why they.
So what different parts of you, like you get really angry at certain times, or I'm just assuming, like, what was it that you were?
Okay. So if you look up essentially like the way people act when they have post-traumatic stress disorder, I'm essentially I was like a poster boy for that.
Okay.
So I dove into a sport when I was younger, and that was where I gained my adrenaline, where I let off steam. I put my aggression. I was very dedicated to that. I ended up being top 12 in the nation. So I become obsessive with certain hobbies that carried me through in dealing with my pain and so on. And so that was my road on it. When that hobby kind of fell apart and I lost a major sponsorship as I was pursuing this to a professional career, and I lost a major sponsor, and I went for it. I lost my apartment. I basically lost everything. And then it was a downward spiral. So it was drugs, got into criminal activity, got into just numbing nonstop with whatever I could, and just a downward spiral of like out of control behavior. And then one day I had I don't know if I can really explain this the right way, but it was almost like a religious experience where I was very, very lost. I was about 23 years old, and I didn't know, like I had issues with authority figures. I couldn't hold down a job for very long. When I felt disrespected by an authority figure, I was like, peace out. I'm out of here. Just go get another job. So there was no stability. It was constant like up and down, up and down. So it was very difficult to cope with. And I didn't understand why. I just didn't understand why. So I went through that aspect of trying to figure out what's going on with me. But I had the experience of one day, like I just broke down. I was in a low, I basically was hitting rock bottom. And I was like, God, please show me the way. And then all of a sudden it was as if an arm came up from behind me, grabbed me by the back of the shirt and just took off, like basically flying down the roadway. And then all these visions started flashing in front of me. Like I was flying, and I came to a fork in the road. And the fork in the road had basically 2 lanes, one going to the right, one going to the left. The one going to the right was going to be essentially the 2 places that I was going to eventually end up in if I continued down the path, which was going to be death or jail. And then the other path was going to be a harder route, a much more difficult one, but it was the correct route and was going to be worth it in the end. And so that was it. After that, I pretty much gave it all up. I was a professional criminal for a couple of years. I was a drug addict. I was drinking. I was numbing with everything I possibly could. And after that, I pretty much called it a day. And 2 days later, I went back home. I moved back home to Chicago and started over again. Now, as I started over again, I was still pursuing the whole volleyball scene. And the whole volleyball scene has quite a bit of, as you can imagine, extracurricular activities after a day at the beach, which includes drugs and drinking and sex and everything else that goes along with that. And so I found myself starting to get wrapped up into that world again. And it was about 6 months in, and I said, forget it, I'm out of here. And I left. I landed a job with a company that offered some traveling, and I jumped in on that, and then I traveled, and I left, and I got out of it. And
how did you stop drinking and doing drugs? I mean, that from what I've heard, that's very hard to do. How did you just stop cold turkey? Did you go through any?
No, I didn't stop cold turkey, but I knew when I was like out of control when I wasn't, and I knew which drugs I experimented with a bunch of different types of hard drugs. And so I knew what was over the line and what wasn't. A little marijuana, no big deal. Marijuana 24/7 for extended periods of times, well, you're not going to be the smartest person in the room. Alcohol is the same thing. Getting drunk every once in a while, that's okay. It's normal. You know what I mean? Blowing off some steam. But if you have to get drunk every single day, if you're drinking in the morning, you know what I mean, then you may be a functional alcoholic, but yet still an alcoholic. So I think balance is okay. You know what I mean? Just taking a balancing approach, and that way it becomes a little bit more non-destructive.
But I think, when you're talking, I'm thinking about my son. He didn't go through all the same trauma you did, but, he's an alcoholic. So he a lot of times would try to stop drinking, tell himself just what you have said, but he just couldn't. It's either all or nothing for him. So fortunately you weren't that way. And I just have a feeling that some of it is your genes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so look, my other uncle that was like a father figure to me, he died. So he died of esophageal cancer, but he basically drank and smoked himself to death. So all of that stuff is in my genes. The self-destructive behavior is in my genes. Mm-hmm. And that's taken a lot of time to kind of go back. And one of the main pillars of my success has been, let me give you the first two because they're pertinent. The first one is that you have to decide early, no matter what you do, that you're going to win. No matter what, you're going to win.
Mindset. You decide.
You make that decision early. It's as simple as that. It's not, I don't know. It's not, I don't care. It's no matter what happens, no matter how long it takes, no matter how hard it is, I'm just going to keep going until I win. Okay. You have to decide that early on. And then once you do that and you have that aspect into play, well, now the second thing that came down to me was essentially making the decision that you're going to win, and then understanding that you don't have to be where you come from. You don't have to be your genes. I don't have to be the end up. It's not how you finish. It's how you start that matters. That's the most important thing. So where you start is not always going to be on the same scale as everybody else. But the opportunity to grow out of that and excel is what makes this country so great. The opportunity to be able to grow out of that. And then the rest is up to the individual. You can choose to do all sorts of things. And I was on a very, very self-destructive path for a number of years. And then I had that epiphany where it was just like, okay, here you go. Here's your choices, death or jail, or you do it the right way. And then you come out on top. And I was very thankful for that vision because I came out of it.
Where do you think if your parents hadn't gone to America?
I don't know what would have happened. I really don't know. I mean, I think it could have gone either way for me in terms of that. I didn't have, obviously, good experience. And then the revolution came in 1990, I believe, or late 89. We had just been there. That was the last time I went back to visit. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure what would have happened if we didn't come to the States. But we came to the States, and in the States, we struggled. Both my parents worked. I was very neglected as a child, and my parents didn't understand why I was the way that I was. And I couldn't explain it because I wasn't able to face those things just yet as a child. I wasn't able to face those things until my mid-20s. So sometimes kids that have PTSD or experience some type of childhood sexual abuse or trauma, they're not even going to know. They just block that off. They close that part of themselves off and compartmentalize so that they can survive and they can keep going. So that was essentially it. Deciding that I was going to win was number one. Understanding that I didn't have to be where I come from was number two. And then not worrying about what the other person next to me is doing, but just going on about my business and trying to improve myself and trying to continually grow and better understand my psyche, my mental physiology and how that works. And once I started getting to those stages, it was really great because as I got closer to healing, it just seemed like it was so close I could reach out and grab it and I could see it. And it just wasn't mine yet.
What does healing look like for you?
So for me, after the age of 4, when I was sexually abused, I basically became an adult. I wasn't equipped emotionally, obviously, but it was a 34-year-long storm. Okay. I'm 38. So this is what healing was for me. I'm 38 years old, a 34-year-long storm that has taken place. And I'd hit rock bottom again. And I looked up in the sky, and the sky was like basically raining nonstop. That storm's been with me for 34 years. And all of a sudden, the clouds began to dissipate, to break apart. And the rays of the sun started shining through. And the sun just completely broke through, and it was a big sunny sky. And I looked up in the air, and I looked at that bright sun, and I looked at the rays of the light, and I said, what the fuck is that? And it's been that way ever since. It just stopped. I
What
had
do
to
you
go.
think made that happen? Do you think it would have happened if you hadn't gone to counseling?
Well, so counseling was a part of it, but I got further ahead utilizing cranial-sacral therapy. I believe it was like 5 or 7 sessions within a year and a half got me further than almost 10 years of therapy did.
So can you explain that therapy? What's that like?
Cranial-sacral therapy is essentially like a soft massage where the person is actually massaging or affecting your cranial-sacral fluids and is affecting your energy. So what happens is they're not massaging you, but they're acting as a beacon or an antenna for you to be able to delve into your own psyche and into yourself in order to better understand where you should focus your energies. And that was the difference between craniosacral and therapy. Therapy would have me going off in all these different places that I was looking, and I was doing all this hard work and reading and research and everything else to try and overcome this, but I was looking in the wrong directions. Mm-hmm. And so when I went to do craniosacral therapy, all of those things were basically it's like a mushroom trip without the mushrooms.
I don't know what a mushroom trip's like, but I could ask.
It's like a mushroom, and you get a lot of visuals and you get a lot of understanding of yourself, and you end up gaining that understanding, knowing where your pain is stemming from, and it helps you to focus your energies in the place that are going to get you results. And so that was really an amazing thing for me. I came across it as I was looking for sound therapy. I was looking through sound therapy things, and I came across craniosacral and Reiki.
Yeah, I've heard Reiki, and I hadn't heard of cranial sacral, and I would just wonder how common it is.
Well, I think it's becoming a little bit more mainstream. I think a lot of people don't really understand what it is, and I think a lot of people look at it as like a hocus pocus, Mm-hmm. But it's been very successful from my understanding dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, whether you're a soldier in the military and have seen combat and dealing with those types of stressors, as well as people that are victims and survivors and thrivers of childhood sexual abuse and other types of stressors. So it's an amazing thing, really, and it's very simple, and it just helps you kind of clear your head and focus your energies of healing in the right direction. It helps you pinpoint where your pain is stemming from.
So I was saying, what does it look like for you then to overcome the trauma? What does that mean for you? What does that feel like?
Like I said, it was a foreign feeling. Those clouds cleared out and the sunlight shined through, and I was like, "What is that?"
You never went back.
I never went back. It was like a pivotal point that it was a culmination of a long time, a lot of work. I was a martial artist. I was married at the time, and that relationship came to a culmination where I just realized that we were both never going to grow beyond where we were as long as we were together. And so a split was required for me to get to my next level and for her to get to her next level. And so that's what ended up happening. So we ended up splitting ways. I went and lived in the gym for a whole year. So I was essentially very wrapped up in the mixed martial arts scene. I was tackling my own demons. I was facing my own pain, my own hurt. I was utilizing mixed martial arts as a way to do so. And, I let other parts of me that have never really even been out, other than when it was unbeknownst to me, I let them come out and be, and I gave them essentially a voice. Uh-huh. And so that helped out quite a bit. It was a lot of work. I really put in a lot of work. I ended up, after my split, I ended up in another relationship that was very self-destructive. And essentially it came down to having to pick either myself or them. And so what it came down to is like self-love. Like, are you going to allow this person to walk all over you and treat you like a doormat? Or are you going to just take the ball and run with it and just love yourself, because that's what you need to do? And so that self-love and self-acceptance is one of the things that most people that are looking to heal, they're constantly looking outwards. They're constantly looking at the next thing that could kind of take away their pain. But you really need to be looking internally.
Right. It's not a thing that you can buy. It's not living in a different place. It's not a different spouse. No matter where you go, you take your luggage with you, and your luggage is you. So you got to look internally. Yeah.
Yes.
And that's probably what's making your current marriage successful, is that you've done that work.
Once I got to that stage where I chose myself, right? And I chose forgiveness, because for a long time, like I said, I was really what people have to remember is that as you're journeying and you're trying to heal your your pains and your ills and your traumas. You're trying to heal those things. And you feel like you can see that happiness is like right there. You just can't grasp it. It's just not yours. And so for a long time, I was really stuck for a number of years. I was really stuck where it was right there. I just couldn't, it just didn't belong to me yet. Mm-hmm. And so I started to kind of toy with the idea of, I can't do it. I don't know what other avenues I can pick. I don't know what other things I can do in order to heal myself. And the only other aspect that I can see as an option is for me to go back to the old country and essentially kill my uncle. And so, no, I mean, really, that was really an option that was on the table for me. I mean, I'm very well equipped. You know what I mean? I'm an instructor. I teach police officer trainers how to do their jobs in the field. I teach professional mixed martial artists. Like, I'm a very dangerous guy to the wrong people. And so this was really an option that was on the table for me for a number of years. But then I really looked at it from a perspective of, if I do that, okay, maybe I'll feel better for a second, but essentially I'll be giving him more control, because then I'll never get rid of that person in my space. I'm creating more trauma that I'll never be able to shake, and I'm selling my soul.
Do you think he ever abused other people?
I don't know. I did what I could from where I am. See, it's a difficult thing. There's no doubt in my mind, if he was someone that lived in the States, that he would no longer be living. Because I was at that stage for a number of years where that's just how my mind was working. But because I didn't have easy access, it just stretched it out long enough to where I was able to heal first and decide that rather than picking up more trauma, I was going to forgive that person in order for me to be able to shed my own.
So why do you tell your story?
I tell my story because I want to help other people. I think amidst all of the pain and the torturous feelings and the feeling like you're never going to get there, and the feeling like, why can't I just be happy? And all those feelings that come into play after a long time. What most people don't talk about is when you go through your victimhood, you get to the survival stage, and then when you finally win and you overcome and you get to that thriving stage. And what most people don't know, it's kind of a secret, is that when you overcome this hurt, you actually walk away having almost superpowers. And that is like an amazing thing that most people are unaware of, because a lot of people struggle with overcoming that trauma so long. They don't understand that that's something they have to look forward to.
Right? It's your always face light up when you talk about superpowers.
Yeah, I know. It really is. I mean, your journey to overcome something like this and to fight your demons and win, and to make that decision early and to do whatever it takes to explore every avenue. I mean, I shouldn't be here right now. I should not be breathing today. And the fact that I am is an amazing, amazing feat in itself. And now I get to help other people. And that's even more amazing. So it's great. My spouse, my wife, she is a beautiful soul. She's along the same path, has had a difficult road, but we're both in the business of helping people achieve their human potential, their highest human potential, in their search for self-love and self-acceptance.
So how do you do that?
A little bit every day. Creating hope, creating the proper energy, letting people know that they're not alone. A lot of victims, a lot of survivors, they just feel that they're not understood, they're alone. No one understands what they're going through, but there's a lot of people that understand what you're going through. And again, when it comes down to is if you make that decision that you're going to win at all costs, remember, it's going to be a difficult road, and sometimes it may seem impossible, but it's always darkest before the light. Okay. So the closer you get to winning, almost you see it, it's there, but the further away it seems, and you just got to keep going, because eventually when you win, that's when you gain those superpowers that, when I love myself, I accept myself. And that is the ultimate goal, because now you can build off of a solid foundation, and your whole world turns around and changes. And now you're left with all these amazing superpowers, because what didn't kill you made you stronger. And that's a fact.
Yeah. So is this your full-time job, helping people?
No, I'm kind of a complicated individual. I have my daytime job, which is a union construction worker. I work in the roadways. I do that about 7 to 7.5 months out of the year. So it's a seasonal job. And then the rest of the time, I focus on human potential, public speaking, martial arts, teaching concealed carry classes for free, philanthropy endeavors, all sorts of things of that nature, creating programs and materials to help police officers be better at their jobs so that they're safer in the field. So I focus on those things. and helping guide other people towards the light, creating that hope and letting people know, hey, look, you can, not only can you, but everyone can. Everyone can win at this. Everyone can win. You just have to keep going. You got to decide you're going to win. You have to keep going. You have to remember that when you're really close to winning, it's going to seem impossible. You have to keep going. And then eventually when you overcome it and you reach that place of happiness and of self-acceptance, it's just, there's no feeling like it in the world.
I think I was listening to a podcast today as I was hiking, and it was talking about that happiness and self-acceptance and the thoughts that we think in our heads. And sometimes a lot of us think such negative thoughts about ourselves that then we project those thoughts on other people, and we think that somebody else is looking at us in a nasty way, or we think that somebody is doing something to us when really it's our feelings projected back at us through that person. And if you really love yourself and can feel good about yourself, then you see the love in everybody else.
Yeah, it's not easy. For me, I'm really focusing a lot on compassion. And having that compassion. I know it's kind of a strange thing coming out of the mouth of a martial artist and someone that considered killing one of their family members for wrongs they did to them a number of years ago. But ultimately, what's been great about martial arts is that it almost has the opposite effect of what most people think. So even though I was emotionally really hurt and not in a great place, learning martial arts actually helped me to really better understand how fragile life really is. And so now, because I'm dangerous and because I know how fragile life truly is, it's developed a deep sense of compassion in me to not necessarily allow my brain to just look at a person and size them up and be like, I know exactly everything about them, because our brains are just so incredible. You could look at someone in a split second, have an entire, know everything about them. That's wrong.
You do.
You think you do, correct.
Right.
You think you do, but everybody has their own hurts. Everybody has their own specialness about them. Everybody has their own journey and their own struggles that they're dealing with. And those things need to be on the forefront. So I think on the collective, if I can help change people's minds a little bit, help create some hope, help inspire people to keep moving in the right direction instead of just giving up early or losing hope and becoming to succumb to that feeling of, I'm never going to feel better. I'm never going to be happy. I'm never going to overcome this, And I had an aunt who, when she was a child, her mother got ill with cancer, and her father was a salesman, but he would go on the road. And so he'd be gone for 3, 4, 5 months at a time. And when the mom got cancer, they all moved into the mom's brother's house. And the mom's brother was taking care of his sister and 3 siblings that were there. Problem was, he was sexually abusing all 3 siblings. One of the siblings, which was a boy, had a really difficult time coping with all of that. He ended up committing suicide. He shot himself and he died. And 5 years later, my aunt, by way of marriage, ended up coping with the same issues, also shot herself. So one of those siblings is still alive, and she's struggling to try and make ends meet with whatever she can. I'm not sure how she's even doing. I know she was struggling really bad for a long time, but the 2 siblings that we thought were doing the best actually were doing the worst.
Wow.
And the person that was much more evident that they were doing poorly and that there were some serious issues is actually the one that's kind of stayed with it and is still alive. So I've experienced firsthand what can take place when people succumb to their hurt and their pain and their, and it's hard. It doesn't take a lot to lose hope and to feel like you're never going to win.
How's your relationship with your parents?
Terrible. Terrible. So my father, my relationship with my mom was a little bit better. My relationship with my father was not great almost ever. And he was very much the judgmental type. He had the answer for everything. He knew exactly what was going on, this and that. So when all these things were going down, when I was explaining to my parents exactly what happened, and because I wanted them to know why I did some of the things that I did, because it was unexplainable to them. They couldn't comprehend why I was acting the way that I was acting and what was wrong with me. And so I was about 32 years old when I told my parents all the details of what took place. And when I was at that stage where I felt like I couldn't overcome it and that the only other option was for me to go to Europe and kill that man, I told my parents about that. And I went to go leave their home, And my father, I turned back around. I didn't leave the house because I'd forgotten something. So by the time I turned back around into the garage, my father was already on the phone. He called his brother to warn him that I was going to come for him one day. My father remained friends with his brother on Facebook. Those are cards that I kind of put in my pocket. From a hypocritical standpoint, my father was always very, very judgmental of me. And so now I had these kind of aces up my sleeve. And I've had 2 bankruptcies in my past. The one before my first marriage, because I didn't want to bring debt into the marriage. And then one after, because my ex-wife actually made a lot more money than I did, even though I was making decent money. But once we split up, I took all the credit card debt and that was attached to my name. Well, I didn't have the income to keep floating the interest-free payments, and you know how people juggle money around. And that's where I was, and I couldn't do it. And I was never going to be able to pay that money back without utilizing my ex-wife's income as well. And so that was a wrap. I knew I wasn't going to be able to pay it back. So I did another BK to get rid of like $37,000 in debt, whatever it was. And my father was very judgmental about that. And it was the second time that I brought my wife, Mary, over to their house to meet them or to hang out with them again. And we had a big, huge blowout fight. And it just it was bad. It was very close to getting physical and so on and so forth. And a lot of ugly, really, really, really ugly things were said. And, I got tired of being judgmental over a stupid bankruptcy. And my father was trying to become the man of principle. And, if you borrow money from someone and you pay him back, that's it, And so I threw those facts in his face. I let him know, oh, yeah, you're a principal guy. Let me ask you a question. How come you're friends with your brother who molested me? How come you're friends with him on Facebook? And his response is right away, because this was the second time that he had met Mary, went up right away because he wanted to be a big shot. And then all of a sudden, it just kind of blew out from there. Oh, good. I'm glad he did that to you. And stuff like that. That's the kind of stuff that was being slung around. And that was the last time I spoke to my parents. And that was right around Valentine's Day 3 years ago. So it's been over 3 years that I've not spoken to my parents. And ultimately, I think there's a huge misconception that socially you have to honor your parents and you have to treat them with whatever and listen to what they tell you. You know what? Let me explain something to you, okay? Toxic is toxic, okay? The people that know how to press your buttons best are the people that know you the most intimately, okay? And if you have someone that keeps making you feel bad over and over again, that's part of your trauma.
Right.
It's part of your trauma. And those are things that I didn't know after I healed on the inside and I forgave my uncle so that I could move on. There were still residual aspects of my trauma dealing with my own parents that was unresolved.
Yeah.
And that will probably never be resolved as far as my father and I are concerned.
Are you an only child?
I am an only child. Yeah, I am an only child. So It's weird, right? You know what I mean? People look at that and they're like, but those are your parents. I'm like, yeah, but they're bad for me.
Yeah,
they're toxic for me. They poison me. I don't need that around. Everything is good. I have a wonderful wife. I have 2 great stepkids. I have amazing in-laws and brother-in-laws and everyone else, positive people around me. And I don't really feel any, it feels kind of weird at times, but then it comes down to it's toxic. It's not healthy. But my parents came here to provide a better opportunity for me in this amazing country of American, having that American dream and everything else. And my mom, one of the last things that she had sent to me was a message. And this is going to sound really weird. My mom's always been pretty good, but I don't know what happened this time. She got whatever. She said to me in an IM that she sent to me that it's that I'm crazy and that I'm just like my uncle, the same uncle that abused me, that I'm a dreamer in America. Would you believe it? She tried to make that sound as a bad thing, but that's to me, that's an amazing compliment when you have someone, it's you've forgotten why you came here. If you think that being a dreamer is bad, being a dreamer is amazing. You know what I mean? Especially if you're working towards accomplishing some of those dreams. So that was her thing. She kind of threw that at me. It was really kind of messed up. How are you going to compare me to my abuser?
Right.
That's, it's fucked up. Okay. Excuse my language. I'm not sure what your audience is like, but I'm being honest. This is who I am. That's kind of a messed up thing to do. And so that kind of, you know what I mean, in terms of dealing with my mom, which I've not talked to my dad before a couple of times, but my mom and I have always been fairly close and tried to kind of keep things going. But now it's just after she said something like that, I'm like, man. So I really don't anticipate patching things up with them. There's a possibility I may patch things up with my mom Maybe after my dad dies, I don't know. But with my dad, I just don't see it happening. There's just too many things that are not really ever going to be.
You're setting the boundaries for yourself. You're doing what it takes for you to keep moving onward and setting boundaries. And
it's hard. Laying boundaries with people that society pressures you to, like, no, you have to respect them and you have to this and listen. I respect the people that help uplift me and they make me feel good. You know what? That night when we got into that argument, my dad was like, this is a regular thing that he used to tell people is, I don't have anything I can say that I'm proud of my son. He used to tell people that all the time. There's nothing I can say that I'm proud of you, my son. And so what I told him that night is I told him, I said, listen, you know what? I go, you don't understand this, but I'm fucking awesome. I'm awesome. And he's like, what? What do you do that's so awesome? And I'm like, if I have to explain it to you, then, you know what I mean? There's a problem with that. Mm-hmm. And I don't have to explain it to you. I know what I am. I know what I do for people. I know how I live. You know what I mean? But those things were all basically, I was being treated like who I was 12 years ago.
Right.
You know.
So if there's a listener here that can relate to what you're saying and wants to reach out to you, how do they reach you?
Well, I think the easiest way that they can reach me is either through social media, or you can actually email me if you would like. That's okay too. My email is pretty easy to remember. It's CCS, so Cat Sam at defenseteacher.com. And that's DEFENSETEACHER.com. So yeah, I have no problem. I work with a lot of people to help point them in the right direction, to help improve their odds of self-preservation, to maybe change their perspective sometimes when they're really struggling to come out of it. And I'd be more than happy to share either my story or share my experiences or perspectives with anybody that could use it or that could need it. So yeah, feel free to reach out. If I can help you in any way, I'd be more than happy to do so.
Thank you so much. Anything that I didn't ask you that you think I should have? Anything that I missed?
No, you know what? I don't think so. I think, again, for me, I'm really fascinated with human potential, and human beings are capable of so much more than we give ourselves credit for. And it's also been said, this is kind of a weird fact that I wanted to share. I wanted to touch base on it earlier, but they said that most people make 80% of their decisions based upon feedback that they get from other people.
Whoa. And that could be verbal feedback, or it could be just body language feedback too.
I mean, it's feedback. Like, you ask someone a question with regards to something, and the advice they give you is not necessarily the advice based upon your circumstances, but it's a projection. You were talking that projection again. It's a projection of what they can or cannot do. So most people look at the other person and they say, oh no, I wouldn't do that.
Right.
Because I wouldn't be able to do that. So if I can't do it, then you can't do it.
Right.
And it's such a, you have to really be able to set yourself free from other people's good opinions and walk your own road and keep walking in the right direction and be able to try anything that you need to do to just try it all, because you never know what's going to work, right? You never know what's going to work. It could be therapy. It could be Reiki. It could be martial arts. It could be whatever it is. If you're utilizing those tools and keep moving in the right direction, just be open to trying anything that has an opportunity to be able to help heal you, to help heal your hurt a little bit. And don't listen to other people, because other people they're only judging. They're giving you advice based on who they are. They're not giving you advice based on who you are. And that's a difficult thing sometimes, because then it makes you double, you're like kind of thinking about things and you're like, oh, maybe they're right. Maybe I can't do it. And it's like, yeah, you can, anyone can, everyone is capable. You just have to keep going. Decide You're going to win, keep going, do whatever it takes, use every single tool, experiment down every single place that could help bring you some solace, and just keep moving forward. And know that when it gets really, really tough and you feel like you're not going to make it, that you're right there. The further, the tougher it seems, the more impossible it seems. You're right. It's right there. Just keep going. You can do it.
Have you ever seen, I've seen it on social media, that little drawing of two people digging a tunnel. And one person is they're both almost there. And the one person gives up and the other person kind of keeps going. You just never really can see how close you are.
Absolutely. And it's always darkest before the light. That's just the way what it is. The toughest time in the morning is right before the sun comes up. That last 45 minutes is so dark, it's pitch black. And then all of a sudden the sun comes up and it changes everything. So that's the best way that I can describe my experience. I think many people are lost to the fact that they may be searching for that self-love and self-acceptance. And you need to give that to yourself. You know what I mean? That it's important. So that's what you're striving for. As long as you're good enough for yourself and as long as you love yourself, you know what? All of the additional experiences that you have with wonderful people in your life, that's all gravy, baby.
Thank you very much, Claudiu. I really appreciate this interview.
Well, of course, no problem. I'm glad that you're doing much better. And I'd love to revisit some of these topics in the future as I continue my work with human potential and, helping other people along their paths. And I look forward to seeing a little bit more of the interviews and the work that you're putting forth. And let's revisit again. Let's do it again in maybe a year down the line and see where we're at with everything, what our findings are.
Sounds good. I could interview you and your wife together too.
That'd be great. I'm sure we have a good time doing that. So that'd be fantastic.
At the end of the interview, Claudio tells me he's hoping that I'm doing better. Well, what happened was we were supposed to do this interview on the 10th of December. And that was the night before my former husband passed away. So I ended up rescheduling the interview. And we actually did this interview on the 19th of February. Claudio gave some great tips in this interview. Deciding to win is key. And he decided he was going to win. Mindset is so important. Notice he used the word deciding. Deciding to win is key. He also said you don't have to be where you came from. And we're all capable of more than we could ever imagine. And that little reminder helps me so much. I hope it helps you. You can apply these lessons on mindset and everything that Claudio shared today. You can apply that to your own situation, to your own adversity that you're facing. You're not alone. Come on over to the Onward Movement community if you haven't already joined us there. It's a Facebook community, but it's more than just a Facebook group. It really is a community. We're all so supportive of each other. We learn from each other. Come on over and try it out. I think that you'll like it. And also, you can check out the Onward podcast on YouTube. Not all of the episodes are there. It's going to take me a while to get them all up. But by the time you listen to this, there'll probably be about 2 or 3 episodes up there on YouTube. And I'm hoping that that will help attract more listeners. Not that I'm not happy with the number of listeners that I've got now. I'm really happy, and I'm so thankful for the Onward Podcast supporters. I'm just hoping to reach more people, to be able to help more people with these authentic stories, these authentic conversations on facing adversity and moving forward. Have a great day, everybody.